Welcome to my video we're gonna talk about. Not me forgetting the topic like 11 seconds into the video. Okay, as I have been slowly churning out some of these episodes, videos, podcasts, whatever you want to call them, I put some stories up showing some of the ideas that I had for videos and asked for some feedback. And one of the ones that got a lot of attention was one that was titled, "Should I be tracking my food? Question mark. A nuanced discussion. So that's what we'll be doing today. This one is definitely gonna be more podcast style. There won't be a lot going on screen. So feel free to put something else on visual if you need some alternative stimulation, or save this episode for a car ride, or just stare at my face the whole time. Wow. Whatever you like, okay? Let's get into it. So first things first, just a background a little bit on my nutrition philosophy and the kind of focus that I have as a dietitian. Just in case you don't know, I am a weight neutral dietitian. What this means is I don't facilitate intentional weight loss, which means I'm not talking about calories, I'm not talking about or tracking weight. We are talking specifically about how to get nourishment into your body, independent of how that affects the looks of your body, trying to focus on overall wellness and your well-being and how you feel without worrying about the numbers. So when I first became an intuitive eater, and when I first started teaching others about intuitive eating, my opinion about tracking was something like, oh my God, if you're tracking, then it's disordered. Very, very quickly, that went out the door because nuance exists, right? And this is what if you take one fucking thing away from my channel and the messages that I'm putting out there, it's that nuance exists and that your lived experience is what should be dictating the way that you approach eating, okay? Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, nuance exists, and quickly I was like, okay, like some people do track their food and it isn't, a harmful activity. With that being said, not a lot of people have the type of brain where they can meticulously track everything that they eat and not have that affect their relationships with food. If you are somebody who has done it before and it has negatively impacted your relationship with food, it's likely that that will be the case again. Even if you feel like you're in a different place with food now, a lot of times getting so hyper-focused on your food will, again, kind of trigger you. With that being said, there are different forms of tracking, and I've really come to realize, especially with my specific client base, which is a lot of neurodivergent folks, that there is some level of tracking, or I like to call it inventory, that can be helpful just to keep clients' intentions clear, and allow them to have a better grasp on like what they're actually eating, and not to facilitate any guilt or shame, just to see like where they're landing in terms of the difference between their intentions and kind of their outcomes. Like, for example, fiber is a big one that a lot of my clients are trying to get more of, and honestly, the more the merrier with that. And I'll have clients who are like, I'm trying really hard and I'm eating a lot of fiber foods, but I'm not sure if I'm hitting that kind of like 25 to 30 grams a day that's recommended, and they want to do a little bit of an inventory. So there are scenarios like that where taking an inventory of what you're eating can be really helpful, especially on a short-term basis, right? Kind of like starting with not tracking anything, and then as you're increasing intentions around nutrition, taking a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month to kind of loosely track, so that you can see where you're landing and if you need to be exploring ways to increase it, or if actually the amount of effort you're putting in right now is like plenty and you're getting enough, right? Some of my clients have found that to be helpful, especially my neurodivergent clients, who sometimes are like, I don't remember what I ate. Like, I can't, it's hard for me to know. So I found that to be really helpful. But that is very different than like meticulously counting calories, right? So calorie counting is pretty much with the incentive of like, you trying to lose weight most of the time. But there are some times where people are like, I think I'm actually under eating. I would love to see how many calories I'm eating in a day. Or people who are struggling with binge eating and they're like, I want to see how many calories I'm not eating in the day and how much I'm eating in the evening. So I have some very tangible evidence that can make me understand why focusing on eating more in the daytime is actually going to balance the scales, and not the body scales, but like the scales of intake a lot more than, you know, continuing to perpetuate cycles where they're like starving all day and then binging at night, right? So there might be times where a little bit of an inventory or data collection can be helpful for that as well. But most of the time, calories are not something that I'm talking about. But things like fiber and protein are. And some of my clients decide for themselves. First of all, I've never prescribed tracking. It's never something that I'm going to be like, you should track. If my client comes to me and is like, I don't know if I'm eating enough protein, like I'm trying my best, but I just don't know, I might say we could do a little bit of an inventory and come back and see. And then they're like, yeah. So that's another scenario where it could be helpful. With that being said, an important part of interacting with the concept of tracking or taking inventory of your intake is, one, being really honest about your intentions. Like, don't go into it saying, I just want to see if I'm eating enough protein, when you like know very well that you like want to see the calories. So please be honest with yourself about the intentions, and then have an open mind about the potential for it to be a triggering experience, right? So if 2-3 days into it, you're ruminating, you're overthinking food choices, it's affecting the food choice you're making. Right now you're eating differently because you're stressed about the outcome that it's going to show on the tracker. That's not really probably a good thing for you to be doing. So please use your discernment when you're deciding whether or not you want to track, and when you're actually starting, like, does this feel good and helpful for me, or does this feel like it's putting me back into a place where I'm thinking about food in a more restrictive or negative way. I was listening to a podcast recently, the podcast called Fit Literate. Laura Gerard is one of the hosts. Love her. If you've never heard of her, Fit Literate, highly recommend. And someone asked them about tracking, and one of them recommended that the lowest tech option might be the best option for you. And I couldn't agree more. I love the idea of literally a sticky note and a piece of pen, perfect, sticky note and a pen, and you just kind of jotting down the amount of fiber or the amount of protein in something that you're eating as you're eating it, and then having that sticky note to reflect on at the end of the day. That can be really helpful. I've actually done that recently to kind of see where my fiber needs were landing. Another part of this conversation too is like having a little bit of an insight into how much you're eating in a day, right? Especially if you're trying to get more of something. If you're trying to get more protein, if you're trying to get more fiber, seeing on your little sticky note that you're like halfway there, or you're almost there and you only need 10 more grams, might help you make a food choice that puts you over, you know, your goal, and you're excited because you were able to reach it only because you had insight into where you were at. Another kind of piece of nuance that can be helpful is like, it can actually encourage you to push yourself over and reach that goal that you otherwise wouldn't have if you weren't keeping track. I think an overarching theme here, right, is the idea that if you are going into tracking with the intention of restricting or staying below specific numbers, and you have a history of disordered eating or obsessively tracking, it's probably not a great idea for you to get back into some level of tracking. But if you're trying to reach goals that are more rooted in like the more the merrier, hitting enough protein, getting enough fiber, choosing a lower tech solution, letting it be a temporary thing that you don't have to do every day or all the time, a short-term option, just so that it encourages you to have a little bit more of those things you're trying to get enough of, can be a great option. Another really interesting conversation that I had with a client recently who decided to do some tracking for this exact reason was, she came to me and said, hey, you know, I'm at the end of LE, which is my program, and she had been eating kind of balanced meals, fruits and vegetables. She had been working a lot on her fiber, and she was like, I would really love to just like see what my overall diet nutritionally is looking like now that I kind of have these patterns of eating that feel sustainable. I just kind of want to see, am I having enough protein? Am I having enough fiber? As you can tell, these are kind of, we're talking a lot about those two things. She came to me and said, I kind of want to see where I'm at based on the fact that I feel really confident in my routines. Just curious, what do you think? I said, absolutely. Do you have any concerns? She said she used to have a little bit of a disordered eating history, but she felt very strongly that her intentions this time around were rooted in abundance, and they were rooted in a curiosity, not in a fear or a need for restriction, and it had nothing to do with her weight, which was very important here as well. And I said, hell yeah, let's try it. We also took some time to identify some potential red flags, right? I asked her, if we're looking at this from a harm reduction standpoint, what's your insight into some red flags or things that might indicate that you're developing a bad relationship with tracking? We jotted some ideas down. She had said things like ruminating, changing the way that she was eating, things I kind of mentioned earlier in this. And once we had that insight, she dove in really confidently. She came back about a few weeks later saying that it had been really helpful for reasons I've already listed. And I said, amazing. Came back a few weeks later and said, hey, I actually took a break just because I was curious. And now I'm back and I have even more insight. I said, please share, would love. And she basically explained that not only was it helping her meet those protein and fiber goals a little bit more consistently, right? Because she was keeping track of it and kind of knew where she stood. She also noticed that the act of tracking, the act of pulling up her phone or her notepad or whatever, and like jotting those few things down before she ate, actually facilitated a little more pause before she started eating, which helped regulate her nervous system a little bit and decrease some of the urgency that was causing her to kind of eat mindlessly and go into a meal and like immediately tap out. We talk a lot about mindful eating and hate the term mindful eating because it sounds so like woo-woo and meditative. When I say mindful eating, what I mean is regulated eating, going into an eating event in a place where your nervous system is relaxed enough to register and interpret your cues, digest your food comfortably, and you can eat at a pace that is less likely to have you overeating. So I have a lot of tools that we explore in my program, Ellie, about that. So she had said that essentially deciding to track before some of her meals helped insert a little bit of a pause that had benefits to her nervous system before she dove into eating as well, which I thought was a really interesting piece of insight. And I asked her what she felt about tracking long term, and she said, I think I'm going to do it when I want to do it, and I'm not when I'm not. On weekends, when I'm traveling, when it doesn't make sense or I don't feel like it, I won't. But on days when I'm locked into a routine, on work days, on weekdays, my more consistent day-to-day eating patterns are playing out, I'm going to use tracking as a tool to keep inventory. And I said, period. Moral of the story, it depends. It totally depends. With that being said, if right now you are not eating consistently throughout the day, meal skipping, I wouldn't recommend tracking. I just wouldn't. I just think that it's going to be an added layer of labor. And if you disagree, period, disagree. Again, your lived experience matters so much more than what I'm saying. But typically, tracking is something that I don't see really being beneficial for anyone in any capacity until they're already in some level of a routine with nutrition intentions, right? Like they're eating 3 meals a day and they figured that out. They've started trying to eat a little bit more fruits and vegetables, a little bit more fiber. They're trying to balance their meals, and they want to use tracking as a way to just push them a little bit more or help them keep track of things. I wouldn't recommend it if right now eating it in and of itself feels overwhelming. I don't think it will help. I think it'll overwhelm you more, okay? But if you're somebody who's like, well, I'm trying to eat a little more protein and you want to see, period, I would recommend starting with a pen and a piece of paper. And don't worry about being too precise or too specific. I wouldn't recommend tracking calories for most people. And I would keep it simple, and I would keep it rooted in this intention of abundance instead of restriction. I hope that was insightful. That was really rambly. I did not, as you could probably tell, like create any type of notes or outline. I was just like, I have all the information I need about this topic right up in my dome, and I'm just going to kind of edit it in post, and hopefully it makes sense. If you have any questions, insights to add about your experiences with tracking or taking inventory of some of your eating patterns, and you would like to share them, please do, so we can kind of crowdsource. Everyone can get different perspectives. That's all I've got for you today. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day, okay?